Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to my channel, welcome back to my jungle, and welcome to another video. Thank you guys so much for being here. To all my new subscribers, welcome. To all the returning, thank you so much for coming back. Before we get started, you guys, look how adorable my mug is. Can you see that? I hope it's not backwards. It says Jesus and coffee. I love it so much. So guys, today's video is actually going to be a Philodendron care video. My last video that I posted was my philodendron collection. I showed you guys all of my philodendrons currently growing in my home. It would have been way too long to do the care with the collection video, so I decided to do them separate. Guys, before we get into it, please remember that I am not an expert. I have only been growing houseplants for 3 years at this point. The care tips that I share with you in this video are strictly what works for me in my home and my living conditions. Your care for your phylos might be completely different than mine depending on where you live in the world, the conditions that you live in, temperature, humidity, etc. I'm just going to be sharing with you guys what has worked for me and my plants in my home where I live. I am absolutely positive that I'm going to forget some things. I did make some notes here that I have in front of me, but pretty sure I'm definitely going to leave some things out. So if I forget to mention anything, if there's anything you guys would like to add, feel free to leave it below in the comment section. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my philodendron care video. First up, we're going to talk about light. I do feel like there is this common misconception that philodendrons can survive and do well in barely any light, so in very low lighting conditions. And this may be true for some lower light tolerant phylos, but what I have found is that most of my philodendrons prefer, at the very least, medium indirect sunlight. I've also kind of heard that they don't really like brighter light, and I've noticed that that's also not true. My philodendrons do well in medium indirect light, but they honestly thrive in brighter lighting conditions. So the brighter the light that I give them, the larger the leaves are coming in, the faster the leaves are coming in, just faster, larger, healthier growth in general with brighter light. So yes, philodendrons can survive in lower light settings, but I would recommend at the very least a medium light situation. Hence moving some of my philodendrons closer to my Mars Hydro grow light, I've definitely noticed they have really been taken off with their growth and just pushing out leaves a lot faster. And like I said, they're getting much larger. So that definitely tells me that the brighter the light, the better. And I think that's true with any plant. I mean, you definitely want to be careful. Like thinner leafed philodendrons can definitely be scorched and cause leaf damage if you just throw them into extremely hot, direct, bright sunlight. So, I mean, you definitely want to be careful there, but bright indirect light for your philodendrons is not going to hurt them, and they are going to thank you for it. All right, next up, let's go ahead and talk about water. So how do I water my philodendrons? How often? When do I know to water? I allow my philodendrons to dry out completely in between waterings. Not only that, I will let them dry out. I have a moisture meter, so if I were to stick my moisture meter in and they're at like a 2, which is technically, really dry, I will even give them a little bit longer and they're just fine. So honestly, Your plants will tell you whenever they need watering. Something that I've noticed with my philodendrons are the leaves will become a lot more soft and flimsy, as with many houseplants whenever they're thirsty. So I typically wait until either the stems start to lean a little bit or the leaves get rather flimsy and soft, and then I will go ahead and give a good water. You definitely do not want to water too often. Do not overwater your philodendrons because you will get root rot. I have done it on several occasions, as some of you know. I am known for overwatering, so just be careful. Make sure that the soil in the bottom of the pot is completely dried out before you do go ahead and give your plant a water. Another thing that I think goes along with watering is the pot size. So I found that most of my philodendrons do really well in smaller pots. I literally don't up pot my plants until they absolutely need it. If you do throw your philodendron into a pot that's just too large for the root ball, it is very easy then to overwater because obviously you have more soil surrounding the roots and there's just not enough roots to soak up all of that water, so it's just setting then in the soil, of course then leading to root rot. I have also noticed that if you put your philodendrons in a pot that's too large, you will notice the growth slow down. My philodendrons do very well in a snug pot for as long as possible, and I honestly will not repot them until there's roots either coming out the drainage hole or until I notice stunted leaves coming in on that plant, and then I say, okay, it's time to up the plant into a pot, maybe 2 inches larger than the one it's already in. I would not go up more than 2 inches. Just be mindful of the pot size. I also would recommend terracotta for most philodendrons. Like I said, most of them are gonna prefer to dry out completely. It can be kind of dangerous, especially if you have a heavy hand and you're an overwaterer like me. If you put a plant that really likes to dry out in a ceramic or plastic pot, and you think it's dry and it's not, it's gonna obviously take longer for the plant to dry out if it's in ceramic or plastic. So it's just a good idea to put them in terracotta, let them dry out, most definitely. So let's talk fertilizer. How do we get these big, beautiful leaves? What do I feed my babies? I'm actually gonna be sharing with you guys the fertilizer that I prefer and I have used now for about 8 months or so, and I love it, but more importantly, my plants love it. My plants adore this fertilizer. Ever since I have been giving this to them, they absolutely thrive. They just do really well. So for fertilizing, I actually fertilize my plants in general, not just my philodendrons, more often than most probably. Now, because of that, I do feel like I run out of fertilizer a lot faster than I should, so I'm having to, spend more money than I would like stocking back up on the fertilizer, and it's not super cheap, but I have kind of spoiled my plants, so I have gotten them used to being fertilized year round. As long as they're still growing, as long as they're still putting off growth, they are still eating. I'm still fertilizing them. So through the fall, through the winter, absolutely. Now, if I notice that the growth has slowed down or my philodendrons have stopped pushing off new leaves, if it's in a season other than the growing season, I guess I should say, I will pull back on the fertilizer. So I typically fertilize my philodendron about every watering. Sometimes I'll skip a watering and do it, every second watering. With that being said, as I mentioned, I only water my philodendrons whenever they dry completely out. So that's typically anywhere from 7 days to 14 days, so between a week to 2 weeks between every watering for my philodendrons. So they're getting fertilized typically about twice a month. They do very well with that. Now, whenever I was in my little funk and I wasn't taking the greatest care of my plants for a couple months, I actually had ran out of fertilizer. I didn't fertilize at all for about 2.5 months, and a lot of my plants definitely took a hit because of that. They began to start putting off funky, deformed leaves, very tiny leaves, just smaller, slower growth. in general, and I knew that it was time. A lot of houseplants would probably be fine going 2 months without being fertilized, but I honestly do believe that I've just spoiled mine by fertilizing them so often. And yeah, they didn't like that very well. So I actually ended up buying some Miracle-Gro indoor plant food, and that's what I used for a couple weeks just to kind of get them fed, just to give them some nutrients until I could get the fertilizer that I prefer ordered, because I do order this off of Amazon. So this is the fertilizer that I use. This was recommended to me by another plant YouTuber. This is a Canadian brand. This is an organic marine phytoplankton fertilizer. It is more of a natural type of fertilizer, and I do believe that's why my plants love it so much. It doesn't have a ton of chemicals and things like that, like a lot of your standard store-bought fertilizers will have in them, which, you know, if you give too much of those types of fertilizers to your plants, you can burn the roots. It can cause a lot of issues with your plants. So I really like this stuff. It doesn't seem to matter how much I use. I'll typically just use a capful, sometimes 2, in my watering can. That does really well. I haven't noticed any negative effects with using either too much or too little of this stuff. Now, this is a 30-ounce bottle. This is $20 on Amazon, but if you are someone who fertilizes regularly instead of obsessively, this would probably last you a lot longer than it does me. Definitely recommend this stuff. You can buy a smaller bottle as well. I think it's for around $13 or so. Amazon has it. Great brand. Plants absolutely love it. But I'm going to show you guys what I use to water my plants. This is another thing that's kind of important that goes along with watering. I do use filtered water on the majority of my plants. Well, not the majority. I use filtered water on my more sensitive or finicky plants, like my calatheas, my begonias, anthurium, and my philodendrons. So I haven't noticed huge issues with most of my philodendrons. They're pretty tolerant when it comes to tap water. They handle it pretty well, but I will say that the more tropical type of velvet leaf philodendrons, I believe, do prefer to have filtered water, just because I think their leaves, their leaves are more delicate and sensitive. I can't get chemical burn on them. I know my begonias and my calatheas throw a hell of a fit whenever I use tap water, more than like a time or two. I do try to water most of my philodendrons with filtered water as well, and I have not had any issues. I used to actually purchase bottles and jugs of distilled or filtered water, but that became too expensive. So I have a water filtration system now that I use, and that works really well. If you have access to fresh rainwater, I know someone had asked me this before, what about rainwater? Rainwater is an awesome route to go on. If you have the ability where you live to collect rainwater and use that to water your plants, they are going to love it. I would say the best type of water to use on any of your houseplants is rainwater, because it's natural. It's the water that they get whenever they're in their natural habitat, their natural environment. They get watered whenever the rain falls from the sky. So they're definitely going to appreciate it if you are able to give them rainwater, but I know many of us are not able to do that. It's even illegal in some places. So definitely check into it before you go, setting out your saucers and buckets to collect your rainwater. But it's definitely awesome if you can do it. But if not, if all you have access to is tap water, I don't really think your philodendrons are going to care that much. I don't think it's going to make a significant difference in your plants if that's the type of water you're using. Now, if it were calatheas or begonias or something like that, definitely wouldn't recommend tap water. But for philodendrons, I think you're good. I just personally don't use it for them myself. Hey guys, so I realized that I forgot to talk about my soil mixture. The soil mix that I typically use on most of my philodendron, most of my aroids in general. Obviously, this is not a philodendron. This is my Monstera standeliana. But I use the same type of mix for most of my philodendrons as well. I just make sure that the mix is a very light and airy one. I like to have lots of large chunks of orchid bark. I also really like the large pieces of perlite. This stuff's kind of hard to find, and it's actually quite expensive. But whenever I can get my hands on it, this is a really great additive, as well as, you know, the regular size bits of perlite. So I typically just mix up my black gold soil mix, add in a ton of perlite, some large chunks of coarse perlite if possible, orchid bark. I use worm castings, a little bit of charcoal, preferably the large chunks of charcoal instead of the fine powder. That's pretty much it, guys. Really simple. I don't use measurements for anything. I pretty much just guesstimate, mix it up until it looks right. Just same thing I do whenever I cook. I just kind of throw a little of this and a little of that until it tastes right. I do the same exact thing when it comes to eyeballing my components for my soil mixture. But yeah, you just want something that drains really fast and really well, something that also allows plenty of oxygen to get to the roots of the plant. Yeah, this is also the same mix that I use on things like my Hoya. Basically, the only thing I wouldn't use this mix on are things like begonia and alocasia. Okay, guys, so let's talk about temperature. They will survive in anything 55 degrees Fahrenheit and up to about 80 degrees, but I would say preferably for your more tropical philodendron, I would say they're probably the happiest between 65 and 80. I definitely wouldn't allow your temperature to drop below 50 degrees. That's when you're probably going to start noticing some issues. But pretty much if you're comfortable in your home, then your plants are going to be comfortable as well. Many philodendron varieties that we have in our home that we love are from tropical climates, so they are used to, you know, that 70, 80 degree weather. We typically keep our home around 68 degrees, and my plants do very well with that. Now, if we're leaving for a few days or a weekend in the spring and summer, I'll typically turn my AC off, or I'll turn it to like 78 degrees or something, just because I know with my windows and stuff, it will get really warm in here and they'll really love that. So it's kind of like, you know, I'm leaving for a couple days. It's not going to bother me if it's 80 degrees in here, and my plants they're going to enjoy themselves for a couple days. Feel like they're on vacation. You know what I mean? So nothing below 50 certainly, but I would say 65 to 80 is a good range for temperature. So now, humidity. Let's talk humidity. I'm gonna need to drink a coffee first, guys. Drink way too much caffeine, guys, but I have 3 children, so, you know, you kind of have to, like, it's not negotiable. All right, if you could see my lovely humidifier back here pushing off the beautiful steam, I'm gonna actually show this to you guys in a little bit. I got a new humidifier, so I currently have 2. Humidity for philodendron. So I have a feeling that many plant parents believe that they can't collect the more tropical types of philodendron because maybe they don't have the ability to give them 70% humidity or an insane amount of humidity at all times. Maybe you live in a really dry environment, a really naturally dry place, desert or something, who knows. And even with a humidifier, you know, you can't really get it pumped up above 50-55%. Well, I'm here to tell you that it doesn't matter. It's not that important. It's not that big of a deal. Like if we were talking about, you know, anthuriums or something, you know, the queen anthurium or something like that, yeah, I'm not going to get on here and tell you you don't need to have like 110% humidity or something, okay? Those guys are crazy. But when it comes to philodendron, they don't require insane amounts of humidity, guys. They really don't. So here's the thing. So like my Melanochrysum verrucosum, my Pastazanum, my Gloriosum, my Glorious. If you give them between 65 and 75% humidity throughout the day, for instance, you are going to get larger leaves. Your leaves are going to come in much faster. Your philodendrons are going to grow a lot faster and a lot better in general, the higher humidity you give them. This is true for most plants, honestly, with the exception of things like succulents. My pink princess, for instance, she really loves high humidity. I rerouted her in a Ziploc bag, and I kind of got her used to that environment. So now that she's outgrown that bag and I've taken her out and I'm trying to acclimate her to just my typical household humidity, she has put off a couple, funky, crinkly leaves. Just trying to adjust from going to like 90 to 100% humidity in the bag to anything between like 55 to 70 in my home, which is relatively high. So she definitely grew faster. Her leaves come out a lot more smoothly. They unfurled a lot quicker when she was in that plastic bag, but she's doing just fine how she is, and she's acclimating, and she will start putting off those smooth leaves again soon, I am sure. Your philodendrons are going to prefer a little bit higher humidity, but I'll tell you right now, I think you will be a-okay. Even with something like the Glorious, this guy, you'll be a-okay right at 50% humidity. Our natural humidity in the spring and summer here is anywhere from 50 to 65%, just depending on the weather, of course. And then in the winter months, the humidity typically drops, so it'll drop down to like between 40 and 50, which is relatively low. In the spring and summer, some days I do have my humidifier pumping, and my humidity will be up to 70-75%. But then in the winter, it usually doesn't rise above 55 or 60, and they still do really well. So the statement that tropical philodendrons require a super high amount of humidity is just false. It's not true. You can keep all of the plants that I showed you in my philodendron collection video. You too can keep, as long as your humidity is around 50%, you are good. They may not grow as fast as you would like them to. The leaves may not get as massive as you would prefer them to, but they will grow, they will thrive, and they will do just fine at 50% humidity. So just keep that in mind. Philodendrons are just great plants in general, and they're just super easy, and they just don't fuss a whole lot, They're very easygoing and just very rewarding. So that's why I think that they're a great plant for literally every plant person. Now, with humidity, I also want to mention air circulation. So this is important with all plants. Air circulation is important even without higher humidity, but if you're going to be running humidifiers and pumping the humidity up past 50%, you really do need some form of air circulation, whether that be having your windows open, doors open, and the outside air, the wind's blowing and circulating throughout the windows and throughout the home. If you live somewhere where you're able to do that year-round, that's great, but I personally have a fan. So it's over here. You guys may have seen it in some of my videos. It's just like a $25 little accelerating fan, 3 speeds, and it circulates, does the job. Last winter, I made the mistake of not purchasing a fan. In the cooler months, it's especially important because higher humidity and lower temperatures is just like the perfect breeding ground for bacteria and fungus and things like that. And that can really take your plants out fast. If you get bacterial leaf spot or blight or something like that on your leaves and you don't notice it, it will spread like wildfire and you are in trouble. I don't run my fan 24/7. I do typically run it every day for most of the day. Sometimes I run it day and night for a few days, and sometimes I won't run it, for 3 or 4 days, and then I'll pop it on. And it also depends how much humidity I have pumping out of my humidifiers. But having that fan on and circulating, not only does it keep the air from staying too moist and getting stagnant, then creating a breeding ground for bacteria, it will also help your leaves harden. So like my philodendrons and stuff, when they put off new leaves, like this one, you'll notice when new leaves come in, they're rather flimsy. It takes some time for those leaves to harden off, and it's very easy to damage those leaves if you mess with them too much before they've hardened. So the fan blowing back and forth, it just really mimics the wind and the air circulation and the environments, the natural environments where these plants come from. So that really helps the leaves to harden off. The air is blowing, circulating, hitting the plants just like it would if the wind were blowing and they were living outside. So that's basically what you're trying to do with these plants. You want to mimic the environment that they came from and basically trick them into believing that they're not living in a house in West Virginia in the mountains. You want to make them believe that they're really living their best lives. And if you can do that, then, you know, they're going to reward you by loving you back. That was a long ramble on humidity. But yeah, if you're going to have higher humidity for your philodendrons, you definitely want some type of air circulation. Honestly, a ceiling fan would be excellent. Also, another issue that can come from higher humidity and no airflow, you can get mold in your home, which we definitely want to avoid at all costs. So just be really, really cautious and careful when it comes to running these humidifiers and things like that. It can literally completely ruin a home. If you get mold in your walls and in your ceiling, yeah, it can be a big issue. So just keep that in mind. So I've had several of you guys ask me, what do I use to clean my leaves, particularly my larger leaves on my philodendrons? Honestly, guys, I just use a neem oil solution. I mix up neem oil, like a drop or two of dish soap with water, and that is what I use. I use that not only to clean, dust, shine the leaves, but also as a pest prevention. I've found that neem oil doesn't really work that great when it comes to treating or getting rid of a pre-existing pest outbreak. I typically, you know, pull out my big guns when it comes to that, when it comes to, you know, an infestation. But spider mites and things like that, they are really attracted to dry, dusty places. I'm definitely trying to pull my plants down just randomly whenever I think of it. I see a dusty plant, pull it down, spray my neem on it, dust the leaves, and, you know, that gets rid of the dust. It cleans the leaf, it shines the leaf, and it makes it a less desirable place for a pest to want to come and set up shop. And neem oil is a pest repellent as well, so spider mites and things like that aren't going to necessarily be as attracted to the leaves of a plant if you've recently, you know, cleaned them with neem oil as they are if they're just super dusty and dry. That's what I use. You can also use things like lemon juice and water mixture. There's many things that you can use to clean your leaves. You can use coconut oil and water. I've heard some people doing that. Just be careful if you are using something, some type of oil like a neem oil or a coconut oil to clean your leaves, that you don't set that plant in bright light or direct light afterwards. Just like if you were to put baby oil or coconut oil on your skin and go out in the sun, you will obviously attract the sun and then burn. Same thing for our plants. So many people have said, I cleaned my leaves with neem and I forgot my plant setting outside and came back a couple hours later and my plant was completely burnt up. Definitely just be careful if you're using things like that on your leaves. Don't expose the plants to any bright or direct sun afterwards. Something else interesting that I did mention in my collection video, but I thought, you know, this is a care video, so we'll go ahead and mention it again. Whenever I first got into philodendrons, like the more tropical types of philodendrons, I was constantly finding these droplets of sticky sap up and down the stems and on the back sides of the leaves. If you aren't aware, this can be a sign of pests. So things like scale and aphids, they actually leave behind something very similar. So they leave behind these droplets of very sticky, clear sap on the stems and the leaves of your plants. So that's a good indication, if you see that you may have a pest issue. That's something I noticed right away whenever I started collecting philodendrons, and I was inspecting, and I could not find, for the life of me, I could not find any other signs of pests. And then I later found out that for whatever reason, philodendrons excrete a sticky sap. Nobody really knows why, at least nobody that I have personally spoke with. So if anyone knows, feel free to inform your girl and everyone else. But yeah, just an interesting fact. Any given time that I walk up to one of my philodendrons, there's a very good chance that there's going to be some sap either on the stem or the leaves. So, you know, if you're just getting into philodendrons and you are noticing this sap and you're like, I can't find the pest, where is the pest? And you're driving yourself crazy, Honestly, if you don't see any damage to the leaves, any yellowing, damage to the new growth, if you're not finding any pests themselves, you're probably fine. It's probably not a pest issue. It's just what they do. It's just what they do. So very interesting. It's just a clear, very sticky sap residue. For pests, honestly, I don't feel like there's any particular pest that's more that philodendrons are more prone to than another. They can get basically the same types of pests as any other plant. One that I've noticed a lot is spider mites. Spider mites tend to just really like larger leaf plants in general. They really like to hang out on the back sides and where the petiole meets the leaf. So spider mites is definitely a big one that I've noticed. Another one that I've heard of but I've never personally experienced in my home yet, knock on wood, is thrips. Thrips also apparently really like the larger philodendron leaves. I've never experienced mealies on any of my philodendrons that I can remember. And then I would say scale is probably another one, up and down the stems, on the back of the leaves. They can pretty much get any pest that any other houseplant can get. So, you know, pest prevention is definitely important. It's definitely important to inspect your plants regularly anyway. It's a good idea in general to stay on top of pest prevention, cleaning your leaves and inspecting them on a regular basis. I said this many times before, philodendrons are definitely one of my all-time absolute favorite genuses of plants, and I know you will hear many plant parents say that, and there's a reason for it. It's not just a hype or a trend, but there's honestly so many different varieties of philodendrons, so many different looks. There's really something for everybody, but the one thing that most all varieties share or have in common, they are all relatively easy plants to take care of and grow. They do very well at taking care of themselves as long as you're allowing them to dry out completely between waterings, fertilizing every now and then, only up-potting them whenever they truly need it, giving them at least medium indirect light, then they're going to probably more than likely do very well for you. And that's another cool thing about it. Even the more uncommon tropical velvety type leaf philodendrons are still relatively easy to grow and keep. They don't require a ton of attention, and yeah, you can just kind of let them be and let them do their thing. Philodendrons are also very easy to propagate. I will show you on this big guy. If either your plant's getting too long and leggy, or you want to share some with a friend, or you just want to make a baby for yourself, they're very easy to cut and propagate and root. They root up super fast and easy. So if we look here, I hope you guys can see, we have a node here and a node here, and you will know that this is a node because you'll see some sign of aerial roots starting to grow. So there'll be like a little notch in the stem, and typically there are some aerial roots or little nubs formed on that notch, and you just cut right below the node and either plop the cutting in water or spag moss, whatever you prefer. And honestly, I found philodendrons to be one of the easiest and fastest rooting plants in my home anyway. 9 out of 10 times whenever I try to propagate a philodendron, if I try to root them, they root up very fast and easy. Also, if you propagate your philodendrons or cut them back, you will notice new growth coming in pretty much right away. You should, with most of them anyway. If you cut the top, you'll get 1, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 new growth points popping out from around the bottom of the pot. Your plant will become more full and bushy. Sometimes I have a really hard time cutting some of my plants, but whenever you think about it, you know, not only are you creating a new plant by cutting it, but you're also encouraging the mother plant to then push off lots of more new growth. So it's a win-win really all the way around. Okay guys, I think that's pretty much gonna do it for this video. I know that I probably forgot some things, I'm sure of it. So if I did, I'm really sorry, but I tried to really touch on everything that I could think of. What works for me and my plants in my home may not work at all for you and your plants in your home, depending where you are, where you live in the world, and what your home environment is like. What are your conditions in your home? Because that really makes all of the difference. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I didn't forget or leave out too many important details, but if I did, I will definitely be doing an updated Philodendron Care video in the future and add anything that I may have missed. But yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching. You guys are amazing. I will see you in my next one. Bye guys.